fact, it's really funny. In the north, they make it into like the Great Plains, and they're like these dudes in full armor and wielding swords are like marching through the Great Plains, and these Native Americans are just like, "What are you doing here? Like, we're looking for gold." Like, and they're like living in like cloth, yurts. Like, why would we? We don't have that here. And actually, I did find a little bit because the Black Hills gold is a big thing, and they did discover that, but not very much. They didn't want to mine; they wanted to just regularly steal gold. However, so the Aztec Empire did have a lot of gold, so they did find a lot there. The gold had to be shipped across the entire Atlantic Ocean, through the Caribbean, across the Atlantic Ocean to Spain, and this meant that there was a lot of gold floating around on the ocean at one time. So it starts a new business. Pirates. This is the beginning of piracy, as we know it. So pirates have been around forever, but piracy as we know it. Yeah, actually, that's what I was bringing myself to.
Okay.
Is pirates in the 1500s would have looked a lot like this.
Okay.
Very brutal.
Very, like, just lots of like sashes and like lighter clothing. They would have rolled up sleeves probably. Big old hats. They would have carried swords like this instead of like the classic cutlass. This is the early time.
Did they have flintlock pistols?
They had arquebuses, is what they're called, and they're matchlock pistols. So you'd have to point the gun, light the match, and then pull the trigger, and the match would snap down and light the powder. So, flintlock, it means that there's a hammer that makes a spark that starts the powder. Matchlock means you actually have to light the little string that starts it.
But you still have to fill it with powder.
Yeah, so you'd still fill the powder, you'd put the ball in, you'd pound it down, and then you'd light it and then point it. And these guns were super unwieldy. A lot of times they'd have like stands that they would just prop the gun up onto because they're really
Did they have
difficult.
cannonballs?
Yes, they did have cannons at this time. The bombard was still being used. Remember the bombards that I talked about last week that brought down the walls of Constantinople? From like that couch to the wall, Cannons like that were still being used in continental Europe. Out on the ocean, they were generally smaller, but they were still primitive. They didn't become like modern. They didn't become like cannons like we know it, like Civil War, Revolutionary War like cannons, until the 1630s in the 30 Years' War, very original name, where the Swedish invented it. They invented field artillery. They're like, what if we made those big cannons? And all the other Swedish guys are like, yeah, okay. And they're like, what if we made those big cannons? Yeah, but smaller. Oh! And they made smaller cannons. Because it took that long to figure it out. It took 200 years for them to go, what if we just made them smaller?
The big ones make more damage.
Yeah, and so they come up with these little cannons. Now pirates just, they still find Spanish gold in the Caribbean because pirates just sunk so much.
Today?
Yeah, they still find it.
The pirates today is more what I was asking.
No. Sorry. I was like, yeah, they still find it today, so I just said, no, not pirates. I mean, there are, but not like we know it. Pirates are like off the coast of Africa, and they're still a pretty big deal.
What do they do?
They rob cargo ships.
What?
They kill a lot of people.
Yay.
They are literally, you can become like a hired mercenary to protect ships from pirates. Now, it's usually like if you have a military background and you want to do more, people like cargo ships and companies like off of Africa will hire you to sit with guns on the side of the ship and just watch for pirates. And don't get me wrong, these pirates aren't like rolling up with handguns and rifles, like mounted machine guns, will pull up on speedboats. Like that's the kind of pirates we have today.
That's
Like, oh! Still today, the Somalian pirates. So back then actually pirates didn't want to sink ships because once you sink a ship, you lose everything on the ship. They would want to get on board the ship.
Yeah.
So they'd pull up real close and they'd throw the hooks and they'd pull the ships together and they'd jump off. And at that point, you're terrified enough to surrender.
Yeah, usually it was also just like a group of fat aristocrats on the ship, and so they usually just give up. And the pirates didn't even care most of the time. They usually take them and just brutally demonstrate how strong they were. They didn't have any skill, but they were brutal as heck.
And that's the point of a pirate, is that you want to terrify who you're fighting into surrendering before you have to fight them. Because they don't know how to fight.
Yeah,
They were using pikes and axes and swords like these, of course, but they were just a misshapen group of criminals who didn't really know. They had no, very few had military training. A few did. The most famous one being Sir Francis Drake. Sir Francis Drake was a pirate to the Spanish, but a hero to the British. So he got like all the awards and was paid tons of money by the British because he was sinking Spanish ships.
They also would like throw in, they just get blood everywhere, throw the intestines around the bow of the ship, just leave a couple guys to say what happened. Just
to a degree, yes.
Do whatever you want to them.
Again, really?
Just destroy them. Yep, I love pirates. Pirates are so great.
Yeah, and they just got like the whole
best.
fantasized version of pirates we have doesn't really exist except for the brutality part.
Except for Captain Jack Sparrow. He totally exists.
Oh yeah. Other thing is pirates often weren't hunting for gold; they were hunting for food. Because if you're a wanted criminal, you can't stop in port to go buy food, and so they want to steal it from the ships.
Oh.
So that was what they stole most of the time, was just food. And then they would steal like gold occasionally. And then they'd spend it all. Like there's lots of records where they'd get a ton of gold, go back to a good port that liked them, and spend all of it. And then they're like, well, great. And they'd have to go get more. So pirates were a big deal at this time. Spain did still get a lot of gold across the ocean to their empire. Their empire at first became the most powerful empire in Europe. They started crushing the Ottoman Empire in like naval battles. And they started like beating up on France, just France like, stop it, please. And then they wanted to conquer Britain. However, by the time they tried to conquer Britain in 1588, what happened was gold was no longer valuable. They got so much gold that it inflated their money. And so gold was no longer valuable to the Spanish, which means because they spent it all on military and not on factories and farms and like stuff that actually produces, their empire collapsed. They ran out of money. They just went bankrupt. And so the very last thing they tried to do was in 1588, they got together a thing called the Spanish Armada, which is just a massive fleet, like hundreds of ships, and sailed it to Britain with the intention to conquer it. And a storm destroyed it. And then the remainders tried to escape, and the British destroyed the remainders. And the guy Philip II wept and gave up. And the empire was dead. That is the last time Spain was like a significant power, was in 1588. So they conquered it, and they conquered the Aztec Empire in 1521, and they fell in 1588. That's what, 60-something years?
What peoples were pirate usually like?
British, lots of British people, or like Native Americans, like people that they would steal, so like slaves, natives, stuff like that. It was just pirates could be anybody though. It was just criminals or whoever you wanted to hurt. The other people would join you.
Yeah, the definition of pirate is someone who commits crime on the water.
And so if they wanted to steal from the British, then mostly French would be pirates. If they wanted to steal from the Spanish, then a lot of British and French would be pirates. So
it's not actually on the water, it's on unclaimed land or something like that, so you can actually be like a space pirate.
Yeah, but you could also just be like a pirate on technology too.
Yeah.
Piracy is not a victimless crime. I've seen that ad before. Pirates are a big deal at this time. Religious wars also at this time are going on, because you guys remember Lutheranism?
Yep.
So all of Europe is just split between these different religions. The Huguenots are a group, the Calvinists are a group, the Zwingliists are a group, the Lutherans are a group.
Zwingliists?
A guy named like John Zwingli or something, I don't remember his first name. He was a Swiss guy.
Why would you keep that last name?
Zwingli.
I'm sorry, not everybody gets to be Williams.
Like John.
Not everybody gets to be the most American last name, Williams.
I like your last name. You have a superhero name. That's cool.
Tennessee Tarrant.
Yes.
One day I'll be a movie star.
Tennessee Tarrant. It'll be very.
That's your real name.
Yes.
That's
Tennessee
actually
Tarrant.
cool.
What's your middle name?
Jackson. Tennessee Jackson Tarrant.
Oh yeah.
Which, if you say my middle name, it makes me sound like I'm hunting down outlaws in the Wild West.
Tennessee
That's
Jackson.
just-
Alright, boys.
That
Tennessee
just-
Jackson is putting together a posse.
You know?
That just reminds me of Michael Jackson. Just get your name changed to Michael. Just.
Yeah. You're so funny. So the religious wars are going on at this time. The 30 Years' War is the last one. It occurs between the years 1618 and 1648. It literally lasts 30 years. Like, you would have been born at the start and been 30 by the time it ended. Because this was, do you guys remember how it started? I talked about it last week, actually. It was a really funny thing.
How what
Defenestration. The 30 Years' War started with a defenestration. You guys remember what defenestration is?
It's something that doesn't need to be called defenestration. It's stupid.
Just throwing something out of a window.
Oh yeah, that was great.
Defenestration. It's where a bunch of Catholics went to a little German city and said, hey, you can't be Lutheran. And so the Lutherans threw them out the window. And they landed in a big pile of poo and survived. The most cliche thing that could happen. And
Wow,
so,
like in Aladdin.
yeah, and that started the 30 Years' War.
And then they
That's so
started
cool.
writing books.
And then they started writing books, yes.
Well,
I mean, they all wrote
Where
books.
did the cliche come from? Though?
Oh, yeah, I don't, probably that, honestly. It happened a lot. Defenestrations were a common thing. They just didn't all end up in poop.
Was the
Most
most
of them died.
Gutenberg press still a thing, or were there new
Yes.
presses?
I mean, like they got better, but the Gutenberg concept was still there. So by 1648, all of Europe had been completely destroyed, pretty much. Like, that's really funny. So they threw somebody out a window. Next thing you know, all of Europe's up in fire. You know, like, just don't even explain the chain of events. What it is, though, is that they start picking sides. So once half of the Germans are Catholic, the other half are Lutheran, they start fighting. The Swedish are Lutheran, so they're like, we'll help you, and they join in. The Swedish get their butts kicked. Their leader is a guy named Gustavus Adolphus. I'm not kidding. Gustavus Adolphus.
Why?
He was a king.
Switzerland and Sweden have to have this.
Gustavus Adolphus. No. Gustavus Adolphus, he dies in battle. He gets a cannon, like, through his shoulder.
Enjoyable.
This is the first war where they're like, maybe we shouldn't put our kings on the front line, is because he died. And so Gustavus Adolphus is leading the Swedish side, and then the Swedish get their butts kicked, but they like do a lot against the Catholics. So the Catholics are like, we need help. So they go to Spain. Spain is like, don't worry, I'll help you. Spain is Catholic. Spain joins in. And then every single continental power is fighting in this war on different sides, and only one power does not help. England.
Wow.
For two reasons. First of all, they've got an ocean.
I thought Switzerland was that. That was what Switzerland. Man.
Switzerland's one of the biggest fighters in this war. And that'll bring me to the next point, but actually that's a big surprise. So Switzerland is part of is just as divided as the Lutherans and the Catholics. Half of them are one, half of them are the other. The English do not help at this time though, because one, they're far away, and two, they have a civil war going on at this time. In 1642, the English Civil War starts between groups called the Roundheads and the Cavaliers. Cavaliers are like the wealthy, fancy people. They're called Cavaliers because they're cavalry. They've got big feathers in their hats and armors. Yes, the macarons. And then the Roundheads are the poor people. Called Roundheads because they shave their heads. They're just poor people.
They shave their heads?
Mm-hmm.
How?
With a sword.
Knives.
How do you get like? Oh, do they just? How close can you get? Like,
Pretty close. You have to be good at it.
Yeah, and it depends on how sharp the knife is.
But like, there were people who their job was a barber, so they get good.
Yeah, before you had those nowadays razors, you had to do it all with knives.
Yeah.
In fact, I found
well, I
one.
mean,
of
they
my-
had razors.
What was his
my
name?
house. Dude, I found one of the
So-
razors.
So during this war, it produces a lot of different, like, incredible advancements. So field artillery, this is where they come up with smaller cannons. Like, why don't we just come up with smaller cannons? There was also a guy named, I can't remember it. I'm gonna find
Honestly,
it.
your nickname is cooler than mine is.
What's yours?
Gabriella.
Oh,
What's your nickname?
my nickname? Tenny. But my name is Tennessee Jackson Tarrant. 30 Years' War. What is his name? General. Can't remember his name.
I love that.
Oh, there it is.
General-
Albrecht von Wallenstein. Albrecht von Wallenstein
German son.
was a German mercenary general who kicked trash. Like, he is one of the best generals to ever happen. Now, during this time, so throughout the 15 and the 1600s, actually just forever, but the 1500s it really shows, is that armies are expensive to have. So it's expensive to feed armies, it's expensive to give them equipment, it's expensive to do any of that stuff. So a new business came into being, and this is mercenaries. So I'll be, you know what? So two types of mercenaries happen. I'll go on in a second. Two types of mercenaries. Mercenary type number one is the Swiss mercenaries. The Swiss are the best mercenaries. In fact, the reason the Swiss don't fight anymore is because their mercenaries were so good that everybody hired them, and they all died. And so Switzerland in the 1700s sat down together and was like, listen, we're rich now because all of our young men went out and like were really expensive mercenaries. But all of them are dead. Yeah, they're dying. So they swore off war forever. And they've kept that promise since then. But at this time, the Swiss are big fighters. They use pikes and halberds. They love big spears pretty much. And the other side of mercenaries is the German Landsknecht, is what they're called, which means servant of the land, land knight. And they were known for using weapons that were opposite of spears. So I'll be right back.
So
I have a fun weapon for you guys.
Yay!
So hang on here, I'll be right back.
Can I hit Cole with it? No.
What time is it?
Can I hit Cole with it?
Just next minute he comes in, there's just like fire everywhere, just like.
Can I hit Cole with whatever it is?
Why am I the target?
Not us.
Because I feel like it.
Because you said give anything.
You died.
It's dead.
Mom, your phone is dead.
No, it's not dead.
The Germans have used.
Well, it's just like a spear without
as much of a stick.
So this is called the Zweihander, is what it's called.
Oh yeah.
Zwei means two in German. So it's a two-hander.
I'm scared he's gonna drill a hole through our floor.
Luckily it's pretty dull. Look at how fat the side is. It's designed
crazy.
for stage combat. But what this is, I'll show you guys. So this was be used, it's pretty dang heavy. I'll show you guys when we go outside so it's not hurt. But this is meant to fight spears. Because
like a mantelpiece.
yeah, right. So spears can reach far away, swords cannot. So they were trying to figure out how to get to spears with swords. And they're like,
Long
what if we made swords even longer? So as you can see, like it's a wiggly sword. You can keep them pretty far away with this. Usually you wouldn't hold it like that. You would hold it like this. It's too heavy to hold up for very long.
Or you
This is comfortable. Do you guys remember what this is called?
Schlussel.
It's super comfortable.
Did you hold it in like low bone cod?
Yeah.
Or that just like
Yeah. It's still not comfortable though because this digs into your ribs.
Oh.
So we'll figure out exactly how to hold it when we go
I should
outside.
hold it like cloud strike, like or like hold it like that, you know?
Right?
That's probably what the sword's based on. Were there any
Just a
swords
really
close
big
to that?
sword.
Nope.
Got a leaf on.
I mean, like the Chinese had one kind of like it called the Changdao, but it wasn't this long. It was like here probably. It was just a long
Oh
sword.
no, I meant the buster sword like that.
Oh, like that?
Cloud sword.
It's hard to say. That style? No, that style's a knife.
Yeah, they just
Yeah,
have like
I'm just
really
saying, like,
thick
But like that
swords.
long? Yes. There was one sword. You guys want to listen to this? There's one sword that got to 7 feet long. It's the longest one they've ever found. And it was used by a Frisian, I think. Yes, a pirate. He was a pirate and a rebel. And he was fighting against the Dutch, who ruled over his country at the time. And he was a giant. Like, he was over 7 feet tall. And so he used a sword that was 7 feet long. And he, they like legend says that he could decapitate multiple people at once, like just like insane stuff. He lived in this tower and like ruled like the region, and like fought in that area as a rebel. And people didn't know about him, but when they found his sword and a helmet that was like this big around, they brought it to the locals and were like, "What is this?" And the locals like, "Oh, that's so-and-so's sword." I can't remember his name, but like, that's his sword, duh. And like, what are you talking about? They're like, yeah, everybody knows about him. Come on, we'll teach you a little lesson. And they told them about this guy who used a 7-foot sword that they found. So that's super exciting. Look at how wiggly it is.
Yeah, they just have like really thick swords.
No, this one is thick because it's stage combat. Swords were usually a lot thinner.
Can I
'cause they
hold
have to
it?
cut. Not yet. Not yet.
Fine.
Can't see what time it is.
It's very light. It feels like it's gonna be heavier the week here.
Yeah. All right, guys, bear with me for one more moment. Everybody hop back in your seats. We're gonna go back out. We're gonna go outside in just one quick second, okay?
Put it down.
Yeah,
Wait,
set it down.
I
We're gonna
wanna
go out.
see-
No, we're gonna go outside for
You
a
guys
second.
are so
You
mean.
can hold it in a second. Okay. So, this is my favorite way to teach a class. the sword like this in my hand.
Yeah, I'm definitely keep a class out. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Just like whoever misbehaves in
You
the
gotta get
class
closer
just
to
gets
the
a
camera.
sword to
So
the
due to
face.
the fact
There's a
that
sword
I
in the middle of the
misgauged
table.
my
Turns off
time,
lights.
because I thought I had a couple more weeks, and also because I talked a lot about the ancient times, and I didn't mean to. So what I'm going to say now is that you guys notice that some of the biggest things people fight over is religion, right?
Yeah.
Also, the Americas have become like a brand new world that is pretty much emptied of people due to smallpox. So this sets it up for colonies to come over. Now, tons of colonies were because governments wanted money, and they would send a colony over, and the colony would make money, and they'd send it back. And another huge reason for this was because they wanted religious freedom, and that's where the Pilgrims come in. Yep, the Americans. So Pilgrims were Puritans who were a group from England. England at that point had become Protestant. They didn't like the Catholics. Puritans didn't like the Catholics, but on the opposite reason. They said the Catholics are right, but they're not doing it enough. And so they got even crazier than the Catholics. And so the Puritans got persecuted for it, and they came to the Americas. And since then, it's became pretty much a refuge to religious and different groups that need shelter from their ruling governments, which means freedom and ruggedness and stuff like that is ingrained in the concept of the people who came here first, America. So a lot of people have that concept, like the Canadians do too, but not as potently in their modern government. It's their old traditions that do. But the Americas and everybody or the Americas in particular, start developing into these colonies that are owned by Europe. And then once you're a colony, you start getting your own government. You don't want to be ruled anymore. And so in the 1700s, the first, one of the first colonies, not the first, but one of the first colonies to break off from their ruling empire was, you know who? In 1776.
Boston?
America. The Americans.
Boston, though.
Yeah, I mean, technically. But yeah, so the American colonies, ruled by the British, were one of the first colonies to break away from their mother empire.
She was a really mean mother, though.
She took all of our money or whatever, all of our allowance.
Wasn't nice.
So once America breaks off in 1783, pretty much, they started fighting in 1776. Once that happened, the rest of the world was like, hey, we want in on that too. And so by 1848 is known as the Year of Revolutions. And every single country, colony or country everywhere on the whole earth has a revolution except for two. In Europe, at least. All European ones, except for two. Russia and Britain. So Britain doesn't have a revolution in its home because they're constantly reforming and treating the people really good. Russia doesn't have a revolution in its home because they are killing everybody who tries to have a revolution. They don't care. They just kill them.
Got him.
And so,
leader?
in Russia,
Yep.
in 1848, it was one of the Alexanders. I think it was Alexander the First. But so those two countries don't have a revolution, but France has a revolution. Most of the Germans have a revolution. Spain has a revolution. Italy has
Technically,
a
Russia
revolution.
did have revolutions.
Yes, but not at that
The
time.
leaders didn't care.
So all of these countries have these huge usurpings of their governments. France has already had 4 of them. France is addicted to revolutions. Every couple decades, they're could we get another one of those? They're going through riots right now. I wouldn't be surprised if it got worse. But I don't know.
They're going through riots right now?
Mm-hmm. Because gas prices are going up.
That's why?
Just kidding. It's because, yes, that's the biggest reason. But it's because the new president is raising taxes, which a big one is gas tax. And so they're leading riots in the streets. The orange
Just
orange
switch
riots
to
are
electric.
It's not that easy.
It is. It's just the people who made gas cars decided that the electric cars aren't good for business.
Yeah.
So they ruin the air. Stupid gas people.
But yeah, so France is going through its own right now. France is on its 7th republic. Starting in 1789 was the first republic. So that means in 250 years, less than 250 years, they have had 7 republics, 7 governments. Yeah. How many has the United States had? 1. it's the United States. And then we had one civil war, which is kind of a hiccup. But
It's more like a rule change.
yeah, exactly. They were like, hey, you're not allowed to come up with your own rules anymore. And the states were like, okay. But yeah, so all these countries have revolutions. Freedom is just like freedom used to not be a concept. You were too occupied with not starving to death. But once these countries started getting bigger and cities started getting bigger, people started ruling over large amounts of people and they started making bad decisions. And so it just became like a rampant, powerful idea. Nationalism became powerful, that I am American. I'm not just British, I'm American. That I am Russian. I am Austrian, I'm Hungarian, I'm Italian, not even Italian wasn't one, but it was like all these different nationalities started rising up.
What would have been not Italian?
I guess it technically became Italian. At first it would have been I'm from Piedmont, which is like a region, or I'm a Sicilian, or I'm part of the Papal States. You know, you would have loved those. But eventually a guy named Giuseppe and a guy named Giuseppe Garibaldi.
What did Giuseppe do?
They were rebels who believed that Italy was one
Two
country.
Giuseppes.
Giuseppe Garibaldi, Emmanuel II, and Cara something.
So they were rebels. What else did they do?
They united Italy. So in 1860, oh no, I forgot. I think it's 68. Maybe it's earlier.
His name was Giuseppe.
Giuseppe. Yep, that group of rebels conquered Italy and it became a nation. Except for one little spot. It didn't conquer one spot. It didn't conquer the Vatican City. And so that's why the Vatican City is still a country today. It's because they made a treaty. They're like, fine, we won't conquer you as long as you agree not to ruin our politics anymore. The Pope was like, okay, I can do that. I think it's about time we do some sword fighting.
That sounds like an old guy.
Yes.
Give me that sword.
So go ahead, guys.
Not lift it more than
Oh
like.
my gosh, that is.
We're gonna go outside, which means that if you guys need shoes on, get your shoes on.
I don't want to fight with the rapier.
I would love if some of you could help me get the swords out of the back of the car. That'd be great. It should be unlocked if you guys know how to open it, but I'll be right out if not. It's a fun sword, huh? That's a good one. Alright. Oh, I need to train with this, so I'm talking this. First things first, battle position, everybody. Let me see it. Good. Just left foot forward and knees bent. And swords. Yeah, let's put them in fluke. So fluke is the position on the hip. It's right through here. Oh my gosh, look at that. Ah, it hurts! The fluke does not work. Fluke works on this side, not on this side. Anyway, so it should look about here. So it's on your open.